So folks, we're back to work once again on old Dale Jr. here, and we're getting so close to putting this rear cross member back in place for the final time. We're going to show you in this video where we are so far and what we've got to do to get that planted one last time. So stay with us. So if this is your first time watching Olde Carr Guy, this is my 1990 Chevy Suburban that I bought in Kansas, sight unseen, and drove it 2,000 miles home from Wichita, Kansas to New Brunswick, Canada. The whole truck is mostly original. The interior is completely stock. Yeah, we've got these flames here that we actually got rid of on the other side, and they're going to be going. And we've got a little bit of a neat design that we're going to be working with on this gold color in the future. We're going to be adding some bigger wheels and tires, and we've had to do some rust repair. These things, even though they come from the Midwest, are still prone to some rust. We did inner and outer rocker panel here. We did the front fender repair here. We did a rocker panel repair here on the passenger side. And we're in the process of working with this rust here on the lower quarters. And we've got this cross member that holds the tailgate in place from AMD that we've been trying to get put into place here for the last couple of videos. If you haven't been watching those videos, I'm going to leave a link right up here to this playlist, and you guys can go back and watch those videos and see what it took to get this far to where we are now. We're getting ready to do a little bit of grinding and seam sealing, but let me show you exactly where we are so that you guys can get an idea of what we're doing here today. So this is the Tailgate Crossmember that we got from Auto Metal Direct. They were gracious enough to send me some of the repair panels that I needed to do the repairs on this truck. I'll leave a link in the description box down below for this piece if you were here looking to see how we did it. And this will help you greatly because there's a lot of rot that sits in behind here, and a common thing to do is for the hinges to rot off like mine. This is what we're using. This whole piece comes as one part number. But in order to get this one in, we had to cut the old one out, which meant removing 8 inches of the floor here. And when we go to put this in, you'll see later on in the video that we have to tuck this area in first. We've removed some trim so that we can kind of slide it down and get it to fasten in here. Before we do that, we have to make sure that we have all the mounting locations. This side had fasteners over here. This side, well, it was completely gone. So we had to fabricate everything on this side to make it work. Once we get all these welds ground down, seam sealed, and ready for some paint, we've got to get some holes lined up, drilled, and some nuts fastened onto the back of it so that we can bolt this thing back in, because that's how it's bolted in. When we took this thing out, the only place that there were spot welds was right in here. There was 3 down this side and 3 down this side. So on this new one, it's basically going to be the same. It bolts in. There's 1 here. There's 4 that go in back this way. There's 2 here on each end. And then the floor pan bolts in clear along here. So because we had some rot back in here, we had to put a couple of patches in here. We had to fill some holes over here. And like I said before, this side was no different. So let's get the grinder out. We'll grind down some of these welds, try and smooth that out again. And then we'll take our cross member, fit it into place, and you can see what it's going to look like when it's done. And if you guys don't follow me on Instagram, you should. I'll leave a link in the description box below. Follow me on Instagram because you'll see some of the behind the scenes footage of what we do when we are working. One thing that I reached out to you guys for at one point was to ask you, how far do you go with the spot welding when you're doing just patches? Do you keep it just the way that I have now with all the spot welds kind of still showing? Grind them down, seam seal it? Or do you keep going and fill everything in and make sure that, water, moisture, whatever, can't get through? And keep in mind, this is a summertime vehicle. It does not get driven in the wintertime. The worst weather that it's actually going to see is likely rain. I think what we're going to end up doing is just grinding down what we have now, seam sealing it, and then going over it with POR 15 to make sure it doesn't rust again. I have pre-treated everything with a rust encapsulator just to make sure that from where we are now, it doesn't go any further. So anyways, let's get to grinding and clean this up, see where we go from there. All right, so we got some of those welds cleaned up there, so it looks like it doesn't look like it was done by me. Maybe it does. Anyways, that's ready for some seam sealer. This is just a small little rust hole. I couldn't weld on that. It was so friggin' thin. I kept blowing through it, so I think what we'll do is we'll just seam seal that. Like I said, we got some rust encapsulator on both sides. Should keep it from rusting. Again, we're not going to drive this thing in the wintertime, and it's going to be protected. So I think what we're ready to do now is we're ready to get that cross member put back in place, and then start marking out some spots where we're going to need some holes, and you know, weld on some fasteners for the bolts. So let's get that put into place and see if we can get it at least bolted in the one hole we know will fit, and draw everything together. So let's get that done. Okay, so as you saw in that time lapse, we got this thing put back into place, and after frigging around with it a little bit, well, we've got this side right where it needs to be. The bolt hole lines up, come down through here, the body line matches up really good. There's one more bolt that goes through this way. That fits really good. We come over here, and those same two bolts, they do line up. We got one there, we got one down there, but we're having a hard time drawing this in. And when we're trying to figure out which way this needs to go, I said, well, does it need to move over that way or over that way? Well, when we come over here, we can see the gap right there is a good, well, that's about the size of my thumb, we'll say. Gap is there, so it should be the size of my thumb over here, and clearly it's not. I can't even get a finger in there. So that tells me that this whole thing needs to shift this way. And if that's not enough of a tail to tell you that that's the way it's got to go, I decided to put 3 bolts into this floor pan. And when you come down here, this rib does not line up with this rib. Again, it proves that it's got to go more that way. So I think what we're going to have to do is figure out somehow to draw this over so that we can get these screws or bolts bolted in and everything tight and lined up. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to get these holes here, those ones there, or these ones in here lined up to be able to put the bolts in. So I'm going to think on this for a minute or two to see how we can kind of draw it together without ruining, first of all, the repair panel. And without breaking any glass or whatever we're going to do by drawing it together. So let's see if we can figure a way to get that done. And you're probably in the comments right now telling me exactly how to do that, and I will appreciate that. The unfortunate part is I'm not going to see those comments until this video goes up, and I've already figured something out. So I do appreciate all the comments that you guys have been leaving, telling me, you know, maybe what I'm doing wrong, or what I could do to better improve what I have already done. So anyway, give me a few minutes and I'll be right back. All right, so what we've done was we've taken a ratchet strap, we've hooked it into a hole here where the tension spring rod for the tailgate goes in. And we've come over here to the frame. So basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to shift the cab this way. Remember before I could fit my thumb in there? I can't anymore. And if we come over here, we've got almost exactly the space that we need to have this thing centered. The problem is we're still not drawing the body to the left. And when we come in here, what we're finding is the patch panel that I put in here, so it's hitting right up in there, and it's pushing the body out. And if we look right there again on that corner, it's hitting the edge of that panel. So I think what we're going to have to do is take the cross member back out and with a hammer clearance that patch that I put in over here out that way so that we can get that thing over there. Well, I mean, by the looks of it, we're half now, maybe with 3/8, maybe half of an inch that we've got to try and clearance that. We may end up having to cut it and tack it back in there. So we've got a little bit of work ahead of us. Let's get that cross member out and go in there and see how far or how much clearance we can get by hammering on it and getting it to move out of the way. All right, so we've cut away all of our welds in that corner, beat the snot out of it, got it pushed back, which means, yep, got to fight with that cross member getting it put back in at least one more time. Probably two, because if it goes in now, it's going to have to come back out to get the holes drilled and then back in to be right back. Well, I think that did it. Once we had all of our welds cut out here and we're able to take and just kind of beat that back enough so that it was free, once we got the cross member back in, it bolts up here nice and flush, gap closed up. Over here, same thing there, and the gap closed up. So I think what we're going to do now is we can go ahead and tack that here in 3 or 4 spots where we can reach it on the outside. Mark where all of our holes have to go for fasteners on both sides. Then we can take it out, weld in our fastening nuts, and finish welding on the inside where we had to cut all those welds. And then I think it can go in for the final time, but not before we go and seam seal and POR 15 all that bare metal. So what a pain. I know that when you're doing body work and putting new panels and this and that in, a lot of times your panels have to come in and out several times to make them fit. Although this is a great reproduction from AMD, there's a little bit of tweaking that you have to do to try and weasel it in there because, well, not every square body Suburban was made the same. And even when they were new off the showroom floor or out of the factory, the panel gaps weren't great. You know what I mean? So I think we've got this to a point where I'm happy and I'm satisfied that it's going to work. So I'm going to go get the outside of that seam welded in 3 or 4 spots so it holds where it is. We'll mark all of our holes where fasteners have to be done, mounted on the outside. Take it out, put the fasteners in, drill the holes, put the fasteners in, tack the nuts on, back the fasteners out, put the cross member back in, and hopefully we will be able to call it good. Once we get that done, then we can start working away at getting the outside pieces here closed in. The reason why we had to open them up in the back is twofold. One, well, we got some rot up here in the front that we're going to have to fix up. But 2 is because we needed to be able to weld on some nuts on the back side here for those fasteners to come through on that cross member on both sides. Quite similar to what they did here for that spare tire well. That sits down in there. So let me get the welding done, holes marked, get this get this thing pulled out of here at least one more time. You saw me struggle doing it by myself. When Dad was here last weekend giving me a hand with some of these patch panels, between the two of us, one could pry and one could lift. This way here, I'm having to do the job of 2 or 3 men. But no big deal. We're able to get it. Let me get to that welding. So after a couple days off, being sick, we're actually back here working on Dale Jr. And by the way, you see my new hoodie? Olde Carr Guy hoodie with the logo and the flags in the background. If you want your very own t-shirt, hoodie, beer koozie, hats, you name it, make sure you hit up shop.oldecarguy.com. There is a link in the description box down below. That way you can help support the channel in other ways than just watching these videos. On a quest to 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year. If you're not yet subscribed, I encourage you, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you like this video, share it with all your friends. Anyways, let's see where we are on Dale Jr. so we can get back to work. All right, so where we are right now is I took a lot of your advice and, well, we finished welding everything rather than just, spotting certain areas in place. And we made this more structural. We've got a couple of little things left to do, but we did manage to get our nuts welded on all 6 locations, 2 here, 2 in behind here, and then the 2 that went this way. And in this corner here, I had one of my guys make up this extra plate to give a little bit of structural rigidity here in this corner, because really all we had was this little piece right here and the one piece that we welded in. So we're going to get this piece set up so that it will actually attach itself right to this, and then we'll go in behind and spot weld that in there. We come over to this side, same thing. We finished welding up a lot of areas here. It doesn't look pretty, but hey, it's done. We got our nuts welded in on this side as well. And one of the things that we found when fitting in that cross member was that it was hitting right along here somewhere. We just took the grinder with the disc on it and we cut a slice right down in through here, and we hammered that back, and that gave us enough room to draw this corner in a lot closer than before. So this corner actually fits almost perfect, as does that side over there. So the goal in this video is to get all of this cleaned up, prime, paint, seam seal, and again, this will happen tomorrow, probably once everything's dry, is get that cross member bolted in for the final time. And once that's done, everything else is just, well, it's minimal stuff. Like bolting and welding in the piece of floor that we cut out along here, getting the spare tire well put back into place, and then finishing up on the 2 lower quarter pieces that we've got to put in there as well. Once all that's done, well, we can start painting, paint matching, and putting trim back together and getting this thing kind of back to drivable condition, because you know what? Spring is just around the corner. As of the day that I'm recording this right now, I think we're at March the 8th or 9th. Must be the 8th, it's Saturday. So, 3 or 4 more weeks, the snow will start to go away, the temperatures will start to warm up, the salt will be off the roads, and we'll be able to drive Dale Jr. on the road. So let me get this thing up in the air so it's in, at working height. We can work away at getting things cleaned up, like I said, prime, painted, and seam sealed. Okay, so with all of our welds all primed on both sides, we even scuffed up the part where the hinges are going to sit, because that'll be buried, and we want to make sure that that gets a coating as well. We've opted to coat everything with POR 15. POR 15 is paint over rust. So what we're going to do is we are going to paint over all the rust and coat everything that we can see and that we can get our brush at, and give it a coat of POR 15. And that way, when we are ready to actually put some color on it, we can coat over the POR 15, because POR 15 is not a top coat by itself. It is actually a rust protection. It's subject to UV rays and will dull and will lose its effectiveness over time, so you've got to seal it when you're done. So once the POR 15 is on and everything is sealed up, we let it dry, and then we can go in and give it a coating of paint or whatever we're going to coat it with, and that way everything will stay as good as it is right now for a long, long time. So I'm going to get this mixed up, and start brushing it on, because that's how I'm going to do it. And hopefully it makes less mess. I'm wearing gloves for a reason. This stuff does not wash off. It effectively wears off. Let's get to work. Well, dang it, I thought I had time-lapsed that whole thing, but nevertheless, we've got all the sections POR 15 that we wanted to. So we've got the inside of the fender here, all the spots that we worked on the outside. And then we come over here, we've got this corner here, all up in there. All on the outside of this lower fender panel, where we did all of our work here, where we did all of our work here, as well as the inside of the fender there. Although it's only lunchtime now, we've pretty much exhausted everything that we can do today, because we got to wait for this POR 15 to dry, which will likely be sometime tomorrow. So when we come back, we'll be getting ready to do some seam sealing and getting some pieces put back into place. Hopefully that cross member for the final time. At least that's the plan. All right, so it's day 2. We've got all the POR 15 done. We've got a coat of paint over top of the POR 15 so that it seals that in. We've got all of our seams seam sealed inside and out on both sides of the vehicle. And even on the cross member itself, we scuffed up, we primed and painted POR 15, this bottom plate, because this is where the hinge is going to bolt on both sides. And once it's up inside the vehicle, we're not going to have access to that to protect it. And when we go to put the tailgate on, we will clean up and do the same thing to the mating surface of the hinge itself, so that when it goes up there, it's going to stand a chance of lasting even longer. I mean, those hinges, if you remember, they're probably at least a good 3/8 of an inch, 1/2 inch thick steel. Like they're probably not going anywhere, but we don't want moisture and crap to get trapped between the hinge and the cross member and do all over again what this thing did to begin with. So if you recall, when we were taking out the original cross member, we had to destroy the cab mounts, the rear ones, to get them out of place. The bolts were seized inside the bushings, and well, we basically just hacked and cut and beat until they came out. But we found new ones, replacements on LMC, and I bought the entire kit for the rear, which consists of 5 different part numbers. So you get the 2 bushings, the bolt, the nut, and the washer. Now, I opted to go for all of this because, well, it was cheap. Well, the nut and the washer were cheap, but the whole thing, 2 of those things, all said and done, by the time I got it over here to Canada, was a little pricey. Needless to say, we've got our new bushings, so those are ready to go in. And I think as it sits right now, we are just about ready to put that cross member in for the final time. So let's get a few things ready and we'll get that dropped in there. So before we get started, is anybody else easily distracted by square bodies? You want a t-shirt like this? Shop.oldecarguy.com, down in the description box down below. We are about to install this cross member. Hopefully for the final time. I know I've said that before, but everything is done in here. So now it's time to get this thing in place, get it bolted up, lined up, and in hopes that when we go to put the tailgate on, we can just close this sucker up and everything's lined up. Because I didn't take measurements like John told me to make sure it's all. Anyways, let's get this thing installed. Well, there we have it. We've got all the bolts in on this side. We've got all but 2 in on this side because we've got a little bit of tweaking to do. But I'll be damned if I'm having to take that thing out and put it back in one more time and struggle with it. We're very, very close. Just got a little bit of fiddling around to do over here. We did put the pan back into place and everything seems to be fitting good there. So I think we are in the home stretch. And when the boys come to work tomorrow morning, the Suburban is still going to be sitting here. And I'm going to get an extra hand at getting some of this stuff lined up and back together. Worst case scenario, we got to haul it out, do that tweaking, and put it back together. But as it sits right now, we are like, we're like this close to calling this job done. So in the next episode, we are going to be getting the tailgate back in place and making sure that it's functional. So make sure you stay tuned to that. And then we can finally button up everything that we have to do here on this Suburban, with the exception of the outside panels and some touch-up paint. We'll be matching the paint to go with that. So make sure you tune in. If you guys aren't subscribed, make sure you're doing that. Like this video and stay tuned for much more here on Olde Carr Guy. And again, don't forget, shop.oldecarguy.com and get yourself some very own Olde Carr Guy merch. We'll see you in the next one.